I managed to get out, and the next thing I was aware of was a burning pain in my side. I looked down and I saw fresh tissue from an obvious wound.
He was bleeding pretty badly.
I thought, oh shit, please, survive, John, please.
We need to go inside, It's locked. Motherfucker.
They tell me there's one bunker, and then if shelling starts, to go over to that bunker door, and then I go over to the door and it's locked. The one instruction I was given, and it didn't protect me.
И, я сижу и понимаю, что, сидеть толку нет, потому что прилетит, если в эту штуку, где мы прятались, может попасть и в окно, не дай бог, или там возле двери попадет, что осколками всех зацепит.
Все сюда! Быстро! Быстро броневик все! Все бегут!
On June 6, 2023, the Novokakhovka Dam in Ukraine's Kherson region was destroyed, causing massive flooding to the communities downstream. The deluge of water emptied out of the reservoir before submerging villages close to the Dnipro River. This put an estimated 42,000 people at risk, while trapping and killing those caught in the floodwaters who couldn't get out of the way in time. This necessitated a rescue operation, many of which were hastily organized, with volunteers coming from across Ukraine to assist. Offbeat research correspondent Dylan Burns was on the scene to document rescue efforts.
It was pretty bad in Kherson due to the flooding, so me and Alex Bartaway from New Voice of Ukraine wanted to head down there so we could film the rescue operations. We didn't really prepare any big plan. We didn't have a lot of embeds. We just wanted to head down there and film whatever we could. We almost didn't get into the city. They were very, very aggressive about safety going in. It was the first time I'd ever interacted with a checkpoint guard, and they had actively checked my body armor and helmet before entering the city. It was the first time, and I had gone to forward operating positions with the army, so I knew it was going to be pretty serious.
While in Kherson, Dylan Burns embedded with a German rescue team called Four Paws Rescue. It was made up of Robin Heller, Johannes Hinterseer, and Timo Baumeister. Their purpose for being in Kherson was to help rescue animals that could have been trapped by the flooding, with the Ukrainian environmental minister Ruslan Strilets saying that as many as 20,000 animals might have died in the flooding.
They were just like near a hostel we were staying at, and we saw them with the rescue gear and all with the vans with the logos on it. So we walked up, we started talking to them. They knew English, and from there we grew it into an embed. We got very lucky that they would allow us to film with them, and they were very interested in making sure that everything's documented, which in this instance, thank goodness that there were some cameras rolling.
Dylan Burns and the Four Paws crew were also joined by British expat volunteer John Jones, who had come to Kherson on his own initiative in order to help out wherever he could, like assisting Ukrainian animal welfare NGO UA Animals in establishing a pop-up animal shelter in an abandoned building in the city. On June 14th, the Four Paws rescue team, along with John Jones, Alex Bartaway and Dylan Burns, headed towards a rendezvous point where they planned to meet other aid workers, including Mitya Harfuch and her colleagues at Christian aid charity House of Hope, before heading out on the Dnipro River to perform rescue operations. At this point though, they were already off to a rough start. The combination of chaotic coordination and new safety requirements for boats that required the Germans to get a boat from a local coordinator meant they were only ready to get out on the water past 6 p.m, much later than they preferred.
It wasn't very centralized, and it led to a lot of the response being very chaotic. And I think this was most clearly shown by the fact that the Germans, who got a red rescue boat from a local coordinator because the requirements for what boats you could take out the water had changed and they had to get a metal, stronger boat than the one they had on hand, they took it out to water and it didn't work. And after a conversation with somebody else, they led me to believe that they had also interacted with that boat and they had reported to somebody that it wasn't working. And so just that miscommunication could have possibly contributed to this tragedy. So this type of chaotic response was not the best environment. People did what they could on such short notice.
They were also informed that the Russians had been shelling in the area the day before, but after other aid workers came back from the river, and said it was relatively quiet on the water, they felt encouraged.
The team was somewhat divided on whether they were going to go out into the water or not. It was already getting pretty late, and there was already so many delays and people were kind of frustrated. Not to mention there were reports of shelling in the area the day before, so some people felt an obvious safety concern being so close to the Russians. But then a rescue team came back from the shoreline and they gave a story of, it's quite peaceful in the water today. It's very nice, it's very tranquil, it's relatively safe. And that might have been true for them, but obviously that was not true for us. But that was enough to convince them to keep going ahead.
The team went down from the rendezvous point to the shoreline and launched the boat into the water with Robin, Johannes and John inside. John was helping drive the boat due to his previous experience, but as they began to run into engine troubles soon after it in the water, the team quickly had to pull out paddles. While they started to run into engine issues, Dylan, Alex and Timo went back to the rendezvous point, not wanting to crowd the muddy shoreline with Russian positions only a few kilometers away.
I knew something was wrong when they took out a paddle for the speedboat, because that's not how speedboats are supposed to work. But at that point, they were getting help from another person out, another boat that was out on the water, a white boat full of locals. And I was called back to the Jeep because they didn't want people to gather on the shoreline due to risk of shelling, wouldn't you know it?
Even after those three left, the boat crew still couldn't get the boat running, even with the assistance of other volunteer crew. After multiple more failed attempts to get the engine started, the decision was made to head back to the shoreline, since they were unable to complete the rescue work safely without a functioning engine. Once back on the shore, a call was made for Timo, Alex and Dylan to come pick them up and help them bring the boat back. It was after the call wrapped up when the crew started to drag the boat onto the shore at exactly 6:49 p.m. local time that the barrage began.
So then they called him on the walkie-talkie that there's a problem with the boat and he's gonna drive down with the car, and on the way the mortar attack came in.
Suddenly, for a brief moment, a distant boom could be heard, immediately followed by the unmistakable whistle of an incoming shell. Thinking fast, Johannes immediately threw himself to the ground to take cover upon hearing the screech of the shell, just in time for it to make impact near the coast. Robin and Johannes then ran to a bunker near the shore, along with other aid and rescue workers, with the mud swallowing their legs as they tried to traverse the shoreline, working against them and slowing their escape as the shelling continued.
When we started running, I think I slipped and fell on the ground. I'm not sure I think it must have been after the first hit. And this was the first time Johannes turnn around and took like 2, 3 or 4 steps maybe back to my position, helped me up, and then we ran together, basically holding hands that nobody slipped again.
Nearly a dozen aid workers had attempted to take shelter in the bunker, more than it was built to hold, with some people trying their best to squeeze into the tight space as the rescue operation was continuously targeted by artillery. During this chaos, John Jones had been hit by shrapnel from a Russian shell while standing next to the rescue boat. This caused shrapnel to penetrate both his upper thigh and lower abdomen, injuring and immobilizing him on the shore.
I heard the first shell explode. It seemed to me to be somewhere behind me. People, of course, went looking for cover, but I was stuck in the mud on the Dnipro. I was wearing hiking boots, which were full of mud, and I couldn't really move very fast. So I managed to get out, and the next thing I was aware of was another shell explosion and a burning pain in my side. I looked down and I saw fresh tissue from an obvious wound, and moments after that I collapsed on the floor.
While the shoreline was being bombed, those at the rendezvous point were scrambling for cover. When Dylan Burns heard the familiar whistle of an incoming shell, he also threw himself to the ground and headed to the door of a bunker that local police told him to use if they came under fire. But it didn't go as planned.
We need to go inside. It's locked. Mother